Hello and welcome to Artefact. My name's Scott McArthur, and thank you very much for once again joining me on my weekly show. Now, just to remind those of you who may not have seen the show before, where have you been? This is now episode 11, and this week we're going to be looking at something really quite different, and that is story and comedy. I'm quite excited about it because it's a different angle, and it's an angle that's not often looked at by organizations and even by individuals when they're telling stories. So I think there's something here that can be quite fascinating for us all. So I hope you enjoy this week. I'm certainly really looking forward to it because I know what's going to happen. Okay, so as always, I like to form a bridge between the previous week and this week. And this one might surprise you a little bit. I was discussing it with my guest, who I'll introduce shortly, and him and I were both giggling at it because it is quite a classic example of how comedy can come into the world and do things, can shine a light even on the darkest place. If you remember last week, I had my wonderful guest, Michelle Mills-Porter, here, and she shared her terrific story about surviving the tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami, and how it demonstrated the level of human magnificence, as she called it, in that experience. But it was a dark, dark experience for Michelle. And I was thinking about, okay, so what would you do with that? Could you do anything with that is in the comedy domain? And I was looking into it this week, and oh yes, you can. And I found comedy in the darkest of places. And in fact, there's a whole genre of comedy that talks about the Holocaust from the Second World War. And I mean, this is not for me to tell the jokes, obviously, but it's an area that I guess I knew that it existed. I'd heard about couples making love on trains before they got to the gas chambers. I'd heard about young girls giggling at SS officers and being pulled out and not being sent to the gas chambers. But I'd never really heard of Holocaust comedy. And when I looked at it just recently, and if you're interested in this, it's available now on Amazon Prime. There's a film by, you will have heard of Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks has done a film called The Last Laugh. And that is literally about, it's a documentary. It's not a movie, it's a documentary. And that is literally about the humor that people used in the camps and after the camps. And now it's obviously the children of the people who were in the camps who still tell jokes about how they survived in the Holocaust, through the Holocaust. So comedy can shine a light even on the darkest place. Comedy can shine a light even in the darkest place. So that, I think, is a reasonable bridge. I didn't know if it was a good bridge or not. You need to tell me. But just before I go on, and you know I've now got a healthy paranoia, can people let me know if you can hear me, please? Can someone just pop it in the chat to let me know? I can see there's people here. Good to see you all. Just let me know. Hello, Siobhan. Nice to see you here. If you just let me know if you can hear me, that would be much appreciated before we move on. I'll just check the oh, yeah, somebody's just said yes. Let me just check on. I do have my concerns about LinkedIn. I know I say it every week, but honestly, you'd think with it being the big professional site that it would be the one that would work, but it's actually the dodgiest one at the moment. Excellent. Thank you very much. I've had a couple of people tell me that's great. Thank you. So I will now proceed without worrying too much about it. Well, this week, I've got a real treat for you, and I've got a special guest. And I think we'll all agree that last week it was a different type of show. I like the sound of my own voice, but not everybody does. And I think it's quite nice to have other people on it to give their perspectives on storytelling. And as I said earlier, this one's specifically about comedy. We've got a comedian, and he's a Scouser, and he used to be a copper. You know, that's all you need to say, really. Peter Edge will be joining us in a few minutes. And I really hope you enjoy listening to Peter as much as I've enjoyed spending time with him over the last year or so since we first met. So look forward to that. But there's a couple of things that I just want to show you to demonstrate how comedy, I mean, there's the dark side, shining a light on dark and on darkness. But there's a couple of other things that came to mind that I thought it might be interesting to help frame the conversation that Peter and I will have after he's said a few things. And the second thing, I'm going to show you another video. And this is a video, well, it's kind of appropriate to do it this week. It's a video about the elections in America. But this is about the 2016 race. And this is an example of comedy being used in a particular way. And I'm not going to put a judgment on it. I'd like you to let me know what you think. But let me play you the video. And remember, I can't speak during the videos, but you should be able to chat with me if you want. So this is only a few seconds. But let me just play this video to you, and I'd be fascinated to hear what you think.
I think Donald Trump has said he's qualified to be president because of his business record. A few days ago, he said, and I quote, "I'm going to do for the country what I did for my business." So let's take a look at what he did for his business. He's written a lot of books about business. They all seem to end at chapter 11. Go figure.
Now, what did you think? What did you think? Before I say anything, what did you think of that? Did that land? Let me know in the chat. Oh dear, says someone on YouTube. Right, okay. What did you think? Oh, I definitely need to somehow have 8 arms to do this job, because you're on all these different platforms. Well, my opinion of this, oh dear, was the piece of feedback I got there. I thought it was quite a good joke. Chapter 11, incidentally, if you don't know, is where in America a company files for bankruptcy. So I could see where she was going with that. But at the end, it was a bit like, I think I said to you a few weeks ago that I made a mistake when I made a video. I was introducing one of my Edge and X, the videos I do every week on a Thursday or a Friday, and I put them on my YouTube channel. And at the end of the introduction, I did this. I went, no, I didn't mean it, but I did it. And it immediately gives you this sense of insincerity. And it was like, at the end of that, Siobhan, just to remind you here again, good question. Chapter 11 means that you file for bankruptcy. So all Trump's books about business coincidentally finished at chapter 11. That was the joke, that they all went out of business. So I think she told it reasonably well, but at the end, and I can play it again later if we've got time, she does this sort of thing. And I think it's comedic, just that, and it takes away the power of the actual joke that she told. So I think it was a good try, Hillary. Well done. Didn't quite land. I think she needs some public speaking lessons. I'm available. Quite a tight diary just now, though, Hillary. Anyway, so oh, Siobhan, yes. So now it's funny. All right. Okay. Sometimes you've got to explain things to people. Sometimes you've got to do it, right? Now, the next one is more about the power of comedy in the context of social change. And there's a particular comedian that I absolutely love. Well, there's 2 actually, there's 3. My 3 favorite comedians are, well, this won't surprise you, Billy Connolly, who I might tell you a little bit more about in a minute. I might not, I'll see how I feel. A guy called Bill Hicks, and this guy who's called George Carlin. Now, George passed a few years ago, but there's a lot of his material on YouTube, and if you've never seen him, he's terrific. But if you're prone to being offended, I wouldn't bother. It took me about an hour today to find a clip that doesn't have any particularly bad language in it. But nevertheless, I think this man is a genius. And again, this is only a few seconds, but I think you'll get the point pretty quickly about what he's doing. And the punchline, well.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms or euphemistic language. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. And it gets worse with every generation. For some reason, it just keeps getting worse. I'll give you an example of that. There's a condition in combat. Most people know about it. It's when a fighting person's nervous system has been stressed to its absolute peak and maximum, can't take any more input. The nervous system has either snapped or is about to snap. In the First World War, that condition was called shell shock. Simple, honest, direct language. 2 syllables, shell shock. Almost sounds like the guns themselves. That was 70 years ago. Then a whole generation went by, and the Second World War came along, and the very same combat condition was called battle fatigue. 4 syllables now. Takes a little longer to say. Doesn't seem to hurt as much. Fatigue is a nicer word than shock. Shell shock. Battle fatigue. Then we had the war in Korea, 1950. Madison Avenue was riding high by that time, and the very same combat condition was called operational exhaustion. Hey, we're up to 8 syllables now. And the humanity has been squeezed completely out of the phrase. It's totally sterile now. Operational exhaustion. Sounds like something that might happen to your car. Then, of course, came the war in Vietnam, which has only been over for about 16 or 17 years. And thanks to the lies and deceit surrounding that war, I guess it's no surprise that the very same condition was called post-traumatic stress disorder. Still 8 syllables, but we've added a hyphen. And the pain is completely buried under jargon. Post-traumatic stress disorder. I'll bet you if we'd have still been calling it shell shock, some of those Vietnam veterans might have gotten the attention they needed at the time. I'll bet you that. I'll bet you that.
That is the one and only George Carlin. I have seen that dozens of times. There's a show on, if you go onto YouTube, the whole show's on. It's about 2 hours. And it is packed with commentary like that. If you're of religious faith, it's probably not for you, but the rest of it is about, American society, about guns, about law, about politics, about poor people. It is absolutely brilliant, and I think it really gets across in many ways better than a standard type of dialogue how complex and how difficult some of these social issues are. So I hope you enjoyed that, and Peter, I know you're listening. Good luck following George Carlin. So I'm going to introduce Peter now. I've already said what Peter does. This is I'll just put your video on, Peter. Here we are. Say hello.
Hi, Scott. How are you doing?
All right, mate. Good to see you. This is my colleague and friend and fellow walking fan, Peter Edge. Peter, could you give a little introduction? Would you mind? Just give everyone a little introduction to what you do.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I was in the police in Liverpool for over 30 years. I've been retired now from the police for about 9 years. Before that, I went to study dentistry, would you believe? But since leaving the police, I've always been an after dinner speaker. So for all of that sort of last 35, 40 years, I've been an after dinner speaker and what I'd like to think was a humorous after dinner speaker. But a couple of years ago, I did a stand-up comedy course here in Liverpool with Liverpool Comedy Trust. And just because I wanted to sort of hone my speaking skills, maybe, develop a bit of a new skill. And I'd always fancied having a go at stand-up comedy. So I've been doing stand-up comedy for about 18 months, saying that there's not been a lot of it this last sort of 6 or 7 months. But that's what I'm doing. I live here in Liverpool or just outside Liverpool. One of the references you just made there was the fact that I'm a walker. I've walked the Camino de Santiago, or at least 3 different versions of it in the past few years. And that's about me rolled up in a nutshell.
Yes. So what I'd like, well, first of all, what did you think of the George Carlin piece?
I've never seen that before.
Have you not?
It's just so typical. I've seen George Carlin before, but yes. I've never seen that particular one. And I have to say, I'll go on to speak about something in a little while, and he does it. He does it. I'll talk about a comic device that is a very powerful thing in storytelling, and you can use it in any sort of context in storytelling. But I'll point out how George Carlin used it.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of comments here for you. Just Doug Easton saying hi, Peter. Tom Morley's here. Hi, Tom. And he said he's a genius. Which one, Peter or George? Hopefully both after.
It's not me.
Yeah. And Joe's given a bit more interesting. Unfortunately, folks, the comments aren't working tonight. I can see your comments, but I can't put them onto the screen. So forgive me for just reading them off the screen. But Joe, hi, Joe. Thanks for joining us. And Joe said, such humour as Carlin's is nothing new. Comedians, in particular alternative comedians, have been doing this material for years. Absolutely. But I would argue he's one of the best. And he was around in the 70s, so he's been around a long, long time himself. But so let's talk humour then. Why is humour important, do you think, Peter? What is it about it in the context of telling a story that makes it work?
Well, I think one of the ways it makes it work is because it makes it enjoyable, and anything that you enjoy, anything that has you releasing endorphins, smiling, operating your chuckle muscles, as Ken Dodd used to say, it makes something memorable, and I think as we perhaps might have discussed earlier, comedy gives you the opportunity to talk about subjects that might otherwise be considered taboo. And you talked about the comedy shining a light on areas of darkness in our lives, in our communities, in society, and it certainly does that. And George Carlin, great exponent of it, as was Billy Connolly. Sadly, he's not quite as good these days, but he's been a fantastic exponent of that sort of dark comedic art. And laughter and the warmth of laughter and the experience of laughing is something which we actively seek out, or I'd like to think a lot of people do. Although I've been to a few gigs where I'm quite convinced that nobody wanted to seek out any laughter, to tell you the truth. It gives us that opportunity, that medium to, if you like, explore and to expose things that in a way that can't be looked at, or is not considered appropriate to be looked at in other ways.
Yes. One thing that I've wondered before is that, there are a few corporate comedians. There are the sort of the PowerPoint, the anti-PowerPoint brigade. There are the people who take the mickey out of corporate language, a bit like what George did there, but in the corporate world. But there isn't that much. There isn't that much, is there? Unless I'm missing a whole genre. I know there are some, but any idea why not?
Well, I'm trying to think, but I suppose because it doesn't necessarily fit neatly into a genre category. It's not stand-up comedy in the way that most people would understand stand-up comedy. I'd have to say it's probably a very, very lucrative and niche market, and some of the people that do it, I've seen some people do it, and they're excellent at it. But the relationship with the audience, I think, is completely different.
Yes,
the expectation of the audience is completely different, and the fact that it's comedy that's being presented in, if you like, the corporate framework, within the corporate rules, makes it a different animal. It's great to watch. Yes. But it's almost like that. I don't know. It's so unexpected in that context. I think that's what makes it especially funny.
Yes, I mean we do obviously have things like The Office and TV shows about it, and there is a comedian. His name escapes me. Who basically talks about organization charts.
Yeah,
that's what he talks about. And it is absolutely hilarious. And he talks about, what skills you need to be an HR professional. Narcissism, don't like people, likes
a Venn diagram, isn't it?
A Venn diagram, exactly that. I can't remember his name.
No, off the top of my head.
Fantastic. So I mean, if I was to ask you about to share some I remember I went on a training course actually with Tom Morley. Tom, you'll remember this. We went on a course about improv and how improv can be used in the corporate environment, and it was an okay course. I mean, it didn't set the heather on fire, but it was an okay course. It was interesting because it was that course that I first considered talking about or making jokes out of the time when I worked in pathology laboratories with dead bodies. You know, and I thought, really? But I have now, and it does work. So it did give me a little bit of a sort of push up, if you like, Peter. But how would you go about it? How would you suggest, or could you give us some examples of how you would structure something to try and, you know, make people laugh, but also tell them something, a little story behind that?
Well, the sort of the mechanism that I wanted to sort of share this evening, it's a comic device. It's a thing that's called the callback. The callback. Okay. So, and you'll all have seen this technique used by some of the very best comedians and speakers, and you can apply it in absolutely any circumstances, and it'll be appropriate. You know, I've even used a callback at a funeral, in a eulogy, and it's a perfect way to ensure that you remain memorable. It's a perfect way to end your delivery on a high note, and it's a trick that, with a little work, anyone can do. So what is it? Well, in simple terms, it's a parting reference to something, usually funny, that you've said earlier in your presentation. So it references something everyone in the audience has already heard or already knows. They were all there the first time, so it's something everyone will get when it's brought up again. And it surprises and impresses the audience at the same time. They're surprised at the return of the joke or the reference, and impressed that the speaker was clever enough to bring it back. It creates cohesion, and it creates a circularity in your speech. You know, in effect, you're welcoming back an old friend from the start of the presentation who's going to wrap it all up neatly and close your show. So, I mean, many of your listeners and watchers will have seen Michael McIntyre do it. He does a great one where he starts off talking about being a parent and the family time that he has, and he has this game that he plays with his children, which involves him chasing them around the house, shouting, "Pants down, you're the loser." And if you've never seen him do it, it's worth watching. Whether you like Michael McIntyre or not, it's worth watching. That's the setup. And the setup right at the outset is, we play a game where I pull the children's pants down and say, "Pants down, you're the loser." And then they chase me. And then he goes off on this big, long story about going to the dentist and having a catastrophic wisdom tooth removal, which goes wrong, and he ends up in hospital, and he ends up going in for an operation. And this takes about like 15 minutes, this. And the very end of the story finds him on like a hospital gurney with one of those hospital gowns on that exposes your rear end, coming out of general anaesthetic, only to see his wife and his children there. And his little lad looks at him and points at him and says, "Pants down, you're the loser." And it just brings the house down. Absolutely brings the house down. Yes. And I was just going to say, you know, George Carlin did it in his use of the words shell shock. So he starts, his very first reference is to shell shock. Yeah. And then he goes through all the different terms. But his last line, when he talks about the Vietnam veterans being treated properly, if they'd been diagnosed with shell shock. And so it's a serious message. It's couched in humor, but it's the start and the finish are exactly the same. And that's how he referenced it.
So that's called the callback.
Yeah, yeah. And I use it. I was going to tell you this story if we've got time. This is a story that I use from one of my after dinner scripts, and it goes. You'll like it because it happened in Glasgow.
Oh dear! Right, no swearing.
No, there's well, yeah, there might have been at the time, but there's not in the story. It's okay. And I was in Glasgow, and I was role playing the role of a terrorist in an exercise. And, yeah, I know, it's easy to imagine, isn't it? Yeah, and so I was playing a Liverpudlian sympathizer or member of the UVF, I think it was, or UFF. Well, one of the Irish terrorism movements. Yeah. And we were on the apron of Glasgow International Airport in the fuselage of a plane, and we're meant to have hijacked this plane when it landed with a load of dignitaries on board. And it was a hostage negotiating exercise. And the way these things are set up, there will be like a team of hostage negotiators who will consecutively address the stronghold where the hostages are being held, and they will relieve each other, and they'll go through this cycle. Now, at the time, Scotland was divided into its constituent police forces. So, you had your Lothian Borders, your Strathclyde, your Northerns. And so the areas were very, very different. It's all one now, but then they were very, very different. So you had your hard-nosed, steely-eyed, grim-faced detectives from like Lothian and Borders and Strathclyde, your Taggart types and your Rebus types. And then you had, yeah, you'll know them. And then you had your Hamish Macbeth types from Northern Constabulary who'd never seen an angry man, And so we're going through. So we've got these hostages, and they make contact with us, and they establish a form of communication, a landline that's brought into the stronghold. And I'm negotiating with the negotiators. And about halfway through the morning, the exercise director, who's in the plane with us, says, "Right, you're going to have to introduce a bit of language that's going to challenge the understanding here." And in Liverpool, where I'm from, there is an expression for a cigarette. And it's a bifter. So, I'm going out for the bifter. I'm going out for the bifter. So it's just like a bifter.
You're making it up.
I wish I was. And of course, it's not well known outside Liverpool. Oh. So I make it one of my demands. And at this time, it's the Hamish Macbeth character who's on the negotiating duty. And I say to him, "Listen, mate, you're going to have to get me some bifters, because I'm going crackers in here. Get me some bifters with you." And this little voice comes back and he says, "I'm sorry there, big fella. I'm not sure. Never mind, not sure. Well, I don't know. You can get loads of bifters in airports. They're all over the place. Well, I don't know that." Bang! What have you done? "I've shot one of them. Now get me some bifters." And I slammed the phone down on him. So
I tell you, that Hamish Macbeth sounds as though he's got a brilliant Bangladeshi accent.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So the exercise moves on, and we go through another series of negotiators, and we get to mid-afternoon, and again Hamish Macbeth is on the call, and the exercise director says, "It's about time we introduced, maybe another challenge, maybe another linguistic challenge, something that they're going to have to go away and find out what it means." And again, here in Liverpool at the time, it was the mid-1990s, top of the heroin boom. And heroin at the time had one of its many nicknames was Nasty.
All right. Okay.
And so I said, "Listen, mate, I'm getting really strung out here. You're going to have to get me some Nasty." And the Hamish Macbeth character said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if we've got any Nasty." "Never mind, you haven't got any Nasty. Get me some Nasty and get it now, or someone's getting shot." "Well, I don't know." Bang! "What have you done?" "I've shot another one. Now get me some Nasty." And I slammed the phone down.
Right.
So It's not going very well for Hamish, really, this exercise. So the way of these things is, they come about tea time. They usually have someone like the SAS, or in this case, because it was a local exercise, the local firearms team. They storm the stronghold, and there's flashbangs, and there's tear gas, and there's all manner of things going on. And so, sure enough, about tea time, everything goes dark. All the windows come in. There's thunderclaps, and there's flash grenades and stun grenades, and all this gas and everything else. And I get trussed up like a turkey and basically kicked about a bit by these huge Scottish blokes. And I can tell you that there are 24 steps from the aircraft down to the runway. And I know that because I hit every one of them.
Oh, my goodness.
And as I did, these two huge firearms guys who were carrying me said, "Bifter, bifter, 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 bifter." They got me to the bottom and they dumped me in this huge puddle, which was swimming with CS gas.
Oh,
And
goodness.
one of them leaned down, he whispered in my ear, he says, "Now that's what I call nasty." And,
God.
and there ended the day, really.
Good Lord. My
so-
life seems really boring compared to yours now, Peter.
Yeah. Well, this was meant to be a favour. I was doing them a favour, for God's sake. But you see that the callback is in the reference to the
Yes.
bifter and nasty, and it works, and it usually goes down quite well. You know, it's good fun.
A couple of questions I want to ask you, and if anyone else has got a question, please ask the question in the comments. But Tom's just made a brilliant. He's added on to your callback idea, and he said he used the idea of the callback at his dad's funeral. It was the punchline. Yeah. It went down really well. The vicar followed me and said, "Well, I can't follow that. Let's get him in the ground."
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Brilliant. Oh, I love it. Well, I can't follow that. Let's get him in the ground.
As I say, I've used it at a funeral of a good friend of mine, and again it went down a hoop. My brief for the eulogy was keep it light. Everybody loved Henry. You know, just try and make it funny. And so I used a line, and it was all about Henry's personality, how he was one of these people who could always say, "Oh, I can do that. I can do that."
Yeah.
And, you know, he'd watch one episode of Casualty and he could do a hip transplant, you know.
Okay. So in terms of, I mean, I think that's proven the point, what you've just done and what Tom added to it. It's a really nice story together. But if you're using that in, say, in the normal world, you know, not when you're breathing CS gas and everything, what would you suggest? How would somebody like me, you know, in my job or anyone, you know, I mean, Joe's a solicitor, Doug's an actor, you know, we've got all sorts of people here. How would somebody put that into practical, you know, make it practical? Any ideas?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did think about this, and you'd have to think about it in advance and construct it. And one of the examples I used in a talk that I did about transferable skills from comedy into the corporate speaking world was, you know, something about a conference. Say, for argument's sake, you're a conference speaker and you arrive on stage after the coffee break and you make some comments about the coffee, you know, about the coffee being horrible or brilliant or whatever it was, and you think of something that you can again say at the very end about either the coffee or not the coffee, or you know, you arrive on stage and you say, "I'm sorry, terribly sorry, I've only just made it here in Milton Keynes Conference Centre because I've spent the last 40 minutes driving around Milton Keynes where everything looks exactly the same and I couldn't find it." And then you get to the end of your presentation and you say, "Well, that's my presentation on high density polymer concrete. Now, can anybody give me an A to Z of Milton Keynes because I've got to get out of here somehow?" So, you know, you're referencing something that you say at the very beginning at the very end.
Yeah, that, I mean, you know, I think I've done it by accident.
Yeah, well, we often do.
Yeah, there was a conference, and I got a laugh. I remember there was a conference I was at in a basement of a hotel in London, and when we arrived, I was on at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but we arrived for lunch. I mean, I say we, there was 3 or 4 of us all together. It wasn't just me being the royal we there. It was 3 or 4 of us, and they had the lunch all set out like it was a buffet type thing, and they had chocolate prawns. I mean, what? I mean, exactly, and it was like chocolate prawns.
In fairness, Scott, you've probably used to deep fried Mars bars, so it's not that much of a departure, is it really?
Well, maybe not. But so at the end of my speech, at the start of my speech, I said something about chocolate prawns, and at the end I said, I can't remember what I said, but I said something that was funny enough that it got a huge, you know, woof response. So so the callback, very good, very good. Has anyone got a question for, you know, we're almost out of time already. You've been on. We could talk all night, but has anyone got a question they would like to ask Peter, please? There's lots of comments, but just is there any questions? I'd really appreciate it.
You might have to say it for me because I'm not seeing some of the chat here. So
no, I'm not either. Well, I can see the chat in the individual areas, but I can't see it on the screen very well. It's not working for something. Here's something from Doug, and I can put a bit. No, I can't. It's not working. There's something wrong. No, don't worry. I'll read it. Right. Doug's asking, is the power of comedy in storytelling that it promotes good emotions that we are happy to remember, whereas we may be more reluctant to revisit sad story memories? Hence, I can remember all of Fawlty Towers. Interesting.
Yeah, I think so. That is my honest belief, and perhaps I'm like you, Doug. You know, I can remember huge swathes of Fawlty Towers and dead parrot sketches, and you know, Manuel's interaction about his rat. You know, we have rats in Spain, don't you? Or did Franco have them all shot? You know, all of that. I can remember all of it because it made me laugh and it made me so happy. And so, yeah, I think there's probably some sort of subconscious thing going on, inside your mind that perhaps suppresses some of the sad things, suppresses some of the sad memories or the not very entertaining stuff, and the stuff that makes you feel good, the stuff that does have you releasing your oxytocin and your serotonin and all those sort of things is the stuff that sticks.
Yes. I and this is more a confession than anything else. I quite often think in comedy. So and I've got to stop myself because in the past I've said inappropriate things, you know, and I've not meant it.
Guilty.
I'm going to tell you this. I've never told anybody this story before. Right? Do I want to tell this? Yeah, I'll tell it. Right. I was working in Elgin. I was there for 6 years, and for the first year, I was living in a hotel called the Sunning Hill Hotel. And we drank a lot. It was a very drinking culture in education. It was a really drinking culture. Every night we were in the pub. And then one night we went to another pub and maybe 200 yards away, but we went to, it's called the Thunderton Arms. It's amazing. I can remember this is 30 years ago. Anyway, and I went into this pub and I'm at the bar and I turned around and in was walking one of the barmaids from the other pub. And she was just so happened she was a very, very beautiful, gorgeous woman. She walked in and she had this light above her head, and it was a really bright light, and it shone down on her head. And as she walked in, I laughed and I said, "That light was so strong, I could see your baldy head," as they say in Glasgow. And she said, "Yeah, thanks. I've got alopecia." And I was like,
no,
honestly, God,
start digging.
It was one of the what? I could always cry telling you the story.
Yeah.
I sent her a bunch of flowers. I took her and her husband out for a meal. I felt so bad.
Yeah, I've had a few of those moments over the years. Believe me,
that's the first time I've ever told that story. God, it's just
I was wondering whether I should ask you to do a few Hail Marys or whether I should caution you before you started that confession.
Anyway, so folks, I'd like you to join me in thanking Peter. That was magic. And
did you want an artifact, by the way, Scott?
Yes, please. I was going to ask you, what was the artifact? What was the artifact?
I'll show you. You will know what this is. What is it?
Is it a nail?
It's a rusty nail. And all I would say is that night that I did that terrorism exercise, the hostage negotiation exercise, the fellas on the exercise, there was a big dinner afterwards, and I was introduced to the rusty nail. So you need to tell your audience what a rusty nail is, because I was destroyed.
I bet you were. Whilst the deep fried Mars bar is a myth that has then been picked up by some chip shops in Scotland, the rusty nail isn't a myth. And the rusty nail is basically, there's two different versions of it, but it's a double whiskey and iron brew. But you can have it with vodka as well, but they usually have it with whiskey. And it is, it's deadly, man. And I would tell you stories about when I was drinking rusty nails, but I can't remember anything.
You know, I'm surprised I can remember the story.
Yeah,
but I don't think they did them with iron brew that night. I think they did them with Drambuie.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's
Is it any wonder I was destroyed?
Yeah, absolutely. So just thank you, Peter. That was fantastic, and I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. That was terrific. Thank you very, very much, and we'll definitely need to have you back, because there are also there's a more, I think there's a more there's a deeper part of this guy that I would like to get out of him. So and why he goes in these pilgrimages, but just something that, would you tell him what you've just released today while I put the caption up, Peter?
Yeah. Today I have released my first podcast, and I know everyone seems to be doing it, but I'd promised myself I was going to do this, and as I mentioned, I've walked 3 Caminos, but the last one that I did 2 years ago, the Camino Portugues, as with the one I'd done previously, I did a load of voice recordings on my phone, and it was for a local radio station, but I still had the voice recordings, and I thought, well, I'll try and put these together. I was advised to put them together and release them as a podcast. So I'm an absolute technophobe with big sausage fingers. I don't do well with technology. So I'm very proud of myself that I've actually managed to release an episode, the very first episode of my Camino, plodcast, as you might say.
Yes, and I think it's great, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in walking, storytelling, culture. It is a terrific little podcast. So well done, Peter. I know it was a tough job for you. Well done, mate. It's a really good job. So let me bring things together for us. I think what Peter's just demonstrated, do you remember? I hope you remember this. One of the things I believe is that we need more empathy in the world just now. And I believe that one of the ways that we can build empathy is by telling each other stories. And that allows us to see the world as others see the world, through their eyes. And I reference Chris Riddell here, or Riddle, as we would call him in Scotland. You maybe speak Scottish tonight, Peter. But Chris Riddle would say, that it's an opportunity to be an empathy engine. Storytelling creates an empathy engine. Well, I think Peter has just demonstrated tonight that comedy can be one of the lubricants in that engine. I think it can be a really powerful part of that, Pete. So thank you very much for that. I thought it was excellent. So guys, thank you very much again. Let's just check the chat before I switch us off. And
there's a question there from Joanna, but I don't know how I can answer it with the chat. But Joanna, sí, hablo un poquito de español, sí.
Oh, well, of course. Oh, she's doing the old lessons, isn't she? Tom says, thanks, Peter and Scott. And he got the joke right away. Well done, mate. I knew you would. Okay, so let's. I'm going to finish with 2 things. One is, have a story-filled week. Keep aware of what's going on around about you, because we spoke on week 1, week 2, week 3 about recording your life, recording the stories, because I honestly believe that these stories can change the world, and particularly in difficult times like the moment. I'm not going to talk about unprecedented times and pivoting, but things are a bit shit. And at this time, I genuinely believe that the people who are going to be successful, certainly in the next 10 years, are the people that are going to refer back to the COVID experience and tell stories about it. They're going to be able to build empathy from it. So please think about how you interact with people as you go through the world, and think about how you can tell them stories. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in again. I'm blown away with the number of you here again. It's really great. And I've got something really interesting to tell you next week, but that'll come next week. Good night.